Are we ready? Yes. Okay. All right. All right. Sorry. Raise this up just a tiny bit for me, and then I'll lower it back down. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. If you did not know where you are, we are about to celebrate the incredible release of Annie Reid's brand new book, Impostor Heiress. So thank you all so much for joining us. This is the book birthday, so you are here for a very momentous occasion, and I'm very thankful that you are here with us tonight. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore, so if you did not know about us, I'm going to tell you just a tiny bit. I'm Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team. It is with your support that we are able to do such events. So not only when you buy a book from Left Bank Books does it help us produce this event series, but it also does great things for the local community, including keeping the parks free and keeping your libraries open, keeping your streets paved, which we have a really bad issue with that right now. So I think you need to be buying more things locally so that I don't break my car on the way to work. For shopping local, for supporting Left Bank Books, and keeping us in business for 55 years. So thank you. Be sure to check out our event calendar on our website, left-bank.com. We do have a lot of really incredible events this month. One that I'm really excited about is season 11 of RuPaul's Drag Race winner, Evie Oddly, will be joining us at the end of the month. We do have incredible events with Paul Tremblay, who is a horror author and award-winning. We are tell you about because we haven't really signed the contract yet, but I will say one of our biggest events that we have done in the history of my being with the store is coming up at the end of July and will be incredibly exciting for a lot of you in the room. A name that all of you will recognize. Don't care what you read, you will know this name. But now, the real reason we are here this evening, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, and then I'm going to introduce our incredible author. The Impostor Heiress, Cassie Chadwick, the greatest grifter of the Gilded Age. Paroled felon, rich doctor's wife, famous clairvoyant. Cassie Chadwick, one of history's most successful con artists, was a master of reinvention. In the dusk of the Gilded Age, she swept from town to town, assuming fresh identities to swindle a fortune so large that it rivaled the robber barons of the time. This is a how-to book, so be prepared. One of my favorite authors, Tori Telfer, has blurbed the book. She is the author of Lady Killers, Deadly Women Throughout History. Love her. Tori says, a delightful, deeply researched look into the con woman who made Charles Ponzi look like small potatoes. Annie Reid brings Cassie Chadwick's wild story into the 21st century, illuminating all the unbelievable details of her life, from her infamous eyes to her fake billionaire dad to her outrageous chutzpah. Annie Delvey, who? So that is a little bit about the book. We are about to hear a lot more, and now I will introduce our incredible author. Annie Reid is a writer and historian. She earned her law degree from the University of Notre Dame and her history degree from the University of Illinois. She lives with her family near St. Louis, Missouri, and runs marathons in her spare time. This is her first book. Would you please help me in warmly welcoming Annie Reid for Left Bank Books.
Good evening. Thanks everyone so much for coming out tonight. My name is Annie Reid and I wrote The Impostor Heiress. It's really thrilling to be here sharing Cassie Chadwick with a room full of people instead of sitting at my desk researching and writing in my little cave. So thank you all for coming out tonight. I also want to thank the incredible Left Bank Books for hosting me. They're just the best bookstore in St. Louis, and I really appreciate them hosting me tonight. My plan is to talk a little bit about my book and then do a reading from it. And after that, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Cassie Chadwick was called a lot of things after her cons came to light. The High Priestess of Fraudulent Finance, the Duchess of Diamonds, Goldbrick Cassie, the Queen of Swindlers, and the Weird Witch of High Finance, to name just a few. But she was born Elizabeth Bigley, a farmer's daughter in a small, rural Ontario town. Cassie got a modest grade school level education at her local village school. But as it turned out, she didn't need more than that. Cassie possessed a natural intelligence and a sharp intuition about people. She knew exactly what to say to get someone to do exactly what she wanted them to do. She picked up on complex topics very quickly. Later, one of her society friends would marvel that it is astonishing how, by persistent effort and hard study, she had remedied the defects of a poor education and had attained the knowledge and culture that are seldom found except in a naturally gifted mind, aided by all the higher educational advantages. He went on to say, indeed, such was her range of information that men who talked with her were frequently astounded at the extent and accuracy of her knowledge. She had developed a natural gift of conversation, and I have heard men of the world say that they have never met with a woman who was such a brilliant talker. End quote. Both Cassie's natural intelligence and her expert manipulation skills made her the perfect con artist. Cassie's swindles were usually a variation of, I'm very wealthy, but all of my money is tied up in the courts right now. If you loan me some cash, I'll totally pay you back, plus some extra money so you make money off of the deal. She always forged these promissory notes and documents to support her claims, and usually forged with signatures of prominent men that she just had nothing actually to do with in life. But she would make up a story about how she knew them or how she was linked with them. She was hardly the first to run this kind of scam, and she certainly wasn't the last, but she absolutely made it her own. Cassie was deeply ambitious. Over the years, as she ran this swindle, it always got bigger. She started as a 21-year-old in her hometown, and she made these cards that read, Miss Bigley, heiress to $18,000. And then she forged the signatures of neighboring farmers to a bunch of promissory notes. She got $500 here and there, usually dealing in hundreds. In Toledo, in the late 1880s, she posed as a wealthy clairvoyant whose money was being kept from her by her evil brother-in-law. And she got $20,000 that time. And finally, in Cleveland, well, it's impossible to know just how much money she made because of the embarrassment. People just kind of took their losses and didn't want to talk about it. But on the low end, she netted somewhere around $2 million. Today, that would be about $56 million. It was at the turn of the 20th century that Cassie ran her biggest swindle of all, the Carnegie Con. This time, going as wealthy widow Cassie Hoover, she met and married Dr. Leroy Chadwick. She moved into the Chadwick Mansion, which was located at the trendiest address in Cleveland at the time, Euclid Avenue. At the time, it was called Millionaire's Row. This was where all high society had their palaces and their mansions. The Rockefellers lived on Euclid Avenue. Cassie began divulging to certain people that she was Andrew Carnegie's illegitimate daughter. She forged his signature to a trust agreement and several notes to back up her claims. She said that she had been born of a youthful love affair and that her father loved her, but he wanted to keep her totally secret because he didn't want the scandal. She swore everybody to secrecy after she told them, but she also made sure that the story spread. She started borrowing these gargantuan amounts of money from banks, bankers, and businessmen in cities from Cleveland to Boston to New York, and even Carnegie's hometown of Pittsburgh. She even went so far as to target men who knew and did business with him. Cassie loved spending money, and she quickly became this avid spender, buying furs, gowns, purses, petticoats, dinnerware, paintings, furniture, sculptures, cars, anything she could get her hands on wherever she went. She bought chairs that played music when you sat down on them, plates that played music when you picked them up. She bought a pipe organ for her husband, and she bought the bed in which President McKinley had slept the night before he was assassinated. Perhaps Cassie's greatest love of all was jewels, especially diamonds. She bought them sometimes by the tray. She would give them as gifts, and she used them as collateral for loans. This led to one of her lesser-known crimes, jewel smuggling. During her many, many trips to Europe, Cassie routinely snuck jewels past American customs officials on her way back. She was caught in 1902 and forced to surrender a necklace to customs officials. But by that point, she had developed this big network of friends in high places. So she got all of her friends to write letters in her support to the customs people. She even got Senator Marcus Hanna, a nationally known Republican leader, to write a letter vouching for her honesty and promising he'd seen the necklace on her in the past. It totally worked. The necklace was returned and Cassie wriggled out of trouble. Overall, the government estimated that Cassie smuggled between $83,000 and $2 million worth of jewels into the country. One of the things that I personally loved the most about Cassie Chadwick was the way she used Gilded Age sexism as a weapon in her arsenal. With the men that she targeted, she played the part of this frivolous, airheaded heiress that she couldn't keep track of her money. She didn't know where it went. One of her dupes later stated why she would do anything that was asked of her. I never asked her to sign a single statement to which she did not readily assent. She would sign statements almost without reading them. And through it all, she appeared almost like a child. She promised to pay these unreasonably large bonuses in order to get loans, appealing to these men's greed. The businessmen, bankers, and lawyers she fooled assumed that because she was a woman, she didn't know what a reasonable, normal bonus should be, and that, of course, she couldn't keep track of her money. By the time they realized they'd been fooled, it was too late. This worked especially well in the town of Oberlin, Ohio. Oberlin was a small college town southwest of Cleveland. Cassie convinced Charles Ponzi, the president of the Citizens National Bank of Oberlin, that she was Carnegie's daughter and that she was going to give him and his bank the chance to administer a trust that Carnegie had set up for her. This would involve very hefty bonuses both for Beckwith and his bank. This appealed to Beckwith's ambition and greed, and he and the bank's cashier eagerly started loaning her money out of their own fortunes. It worked like a charm. Beckwith and Spear kept loaning her money, then turned to the bank's money when their own money ran out. Through bank certified checks, Cassie eventually got $247,609, or around $8 million today, out of the Citizens National Bank. The men who had been duped were utterly stunned to learn that she was not actually Carnegie's daughter. Beckwith bemoaned that, do you think that woman could have executed the name of Andrew Carnegie upon the notes? She may have done so, but if so, she is gifted with far more than ordinary cunning. Another man lamented, my friends tell me that she is not the daughter of Carnegie, that she is a fraud, and that I have been duped by one of the most notorious women of the age. I can simply say that if I have been the victim of this woman's craft and duplicity, then hundreds of others, including some of the wisest men in Cleveland, have been equally fooled by her. And he later also marveled, who would ever have dreamed that one woman could accomplish such widespread havoc? Thank you. Her many swindles meant that her name was often in the news, and Gilded Age Americans couldn't get enough of Cassie Chadwick. In all three of her trials, the courtrooms were totally packed with spectators, and most of these spectators were women. Journalists breathlessly reported on her fashion choices. At her Toledo trial, local gamblers were betting amongst themselves about whether she'd be convicted or acquitted. At the Cleveland trial, police had to set up this complicated system of triple barricades to prevent crowds from swarming the courtroom. She made countless headlines across the country as they scrambled to keep up with her crimes. As Cassie Chadwick, the media scrutiny was especially intense. In December of 1904, Cassie couldn't go anywhere without hordes of reporters and crowds of people crowding around her. She once clambered over a roof, down a fire escape, and onto a neighboring building in order to escape a crowd that had gathered in the street below. Newspapers published any scrap of information that they could find about her. Strangers swore they knew her. Letters from around the country poured into the jail where she was later held. These letters would sometimes give legal advice. Some of them wanted to know where they could purchase some of Cassie's things. One man sent her a rabbit's foot for luck, and another sent her a single dollar in case she needed cash. Entertainers also gravitated toward Cassie's story. A famous vaudeville actress of the time came to jail to have lunch with her and brought her a whole bunch of roses. A vaudeville house in Toledo offered her bail plus a salary of $2,000 a week to perform at their venue. In 1911, Sherlock Holmes author Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a story based off of her entitled The Chadwick Case, including lengthy quotes from the men who had known her. Cassie was truly a celebrity criminal of the Gilded Age. Despite the fact that Cassie's most blatant, harmful, and easy-to-prove crime was forgery, she was never actually tried for forgery. She was indicted, but instead was tried federally for conspiracy to missupply the funds of a national bank. And that was the Citizens National Bank of Oberlin. This was a very technical charge, usually reserved for actual bankers. After all, it's hard to conspire to defraud a bank if you don't work there. In my mind, one reason why this might have happened might easily have been Andrew Carnegie. In my book, I tell Carnegie's story in a series of really brief chapters alongside of Cassie's. I think their stories are interesting to compare because they both came to the United States with nothing. They're interesting to contrast because he was a man and she was a woman. They were both very ambitious. He chose industry, she chose crime. And by the time he became entangled with Cassie Chadwick, Carnegie had become a household name. He had started out life as a poor Scottish immigrant, working his way from making $120 a week as a bobbin boy, or $120 an hour, not a week, as a bobbin boy, to selling US steel for $480 million, making him the richest man in the world at the time. Carnegie had devoted himself to philanthropy, donating his fortune to build public libraries around the country. But by that point, he'd also had his share of troubles, including a tragic strike at his homestead steelworks that had ended with 10 lives lost. He'd been publicly blamed for the disaster and had worked really hard in the years since to reclaim his reputation. Andrew Carnegie, of course, had no idea that Cassie was passing herself off as his illegitimate daughter, or that she had signed his name to a bunch of notes and documents. When he found out, he was just astounded and very unhappy. Understandably, he wanted absolutely nothing to do with Cassie Chadwick. He refused to come and testify before a grand jury about her forgeries, instead having a telegram of his read into evidence. He also got a doctor's note saying that he couldn't come to Cleveland to testify due to acute lumbago, back pain, but then hightailed it to Florida before he could be forced to come and testify anyway. It's understandable that he didn't want to deal with it. If a forgery trial had happened, he would have had to testify in a packed courtroom about not having signed the notes and not having a secret love child. He would have been cross-examined, possibly about his love life from decades ago. It would have been immensely undignified for a man who had worked hard to cultivate a reputation as a wise, worldly, generous-hearted philanthropist. And that's not to mention the other prominent men in Cleveland who might have had their names dragged into a forgery investigation. One prosecutor remarked that there is no doubt but that hundreds of thousands have been borrowed in northern Ohio, of which the public knows nothing. The notes have been pushed into pigeonholes and will never see the light of day. The individuals who loaned her money are simply pocketing their losses, and banks are maintaining strict secrecy in order to protect their credit. In the years after the Carnegie Con, every female swindler who made the news was compared to Cassie Chadwick. Some male ones were as well. When Charles Ponzi was busted for his infamous Ponzi scheme, a journalist noted that Ponzi is a tiger compared to Cassie. These days, women swindlers have taken over popular culture in a really big way. Cassie's own story worked its way into the second season of HBO's The Gilded Age. Elizabeth Holmes became fodder for a book and a popular Hulu series. And of course, no one has grabbed our attention like Anna Delvey, the fake heiress. Anna posed as an heiress, infiltrating the New York social scene and parting friends and businesses from their money. She inspired a Shonda Rhimes Netflix series, a book, and countless articles about her crimes, her fashion, and her artwork. If Cassie Chadwick was alive today, I'm convinced her crimes would look something like Delvey's. Stylish, ambitious, aesthetically chronicled on Instagram. I've tried to write Cassie's story in a way that stylistically reflects that. Women loved her then, women should love her now. What is it that we find so fascinating about swindlers? It's hard to say. Maybe it's because they're underdogs, outsiders making up for their lack of status with wits and charm. It's easy to root for an underdog, especially a Gilded Age woman, getting the better of the rich Gilded Age businessmen who assume that she must be clueless because she's a woman. Or maybe it's because we get to live vicariously through them. Like Cassie, I could never drop tens of thousands of dollars at a time on diamonds, or stay at New York's swankiest hotels unless I became someone else entirely. But when I read about Cassie, I can step into her shoes, I can feel the Italian marble under my feet, and see the sparkle of jewels. I can feel the thrill of the con. Those are my notes. Thank you. And now I'll read the book's prologue. With a practiced flourish, the man slipped his pocket watch out of his vest. Frowning, he checked the time, then perused the room again. Around him, people milled through the main entrance of the Holland House Hotel, leather oxfords and sealskin boots clapping against the floor. No sign of his client among them, flighty woman. Smoothly, he snapped the watch shut and replaced it. She could afford to make him wait. All the attorneys he knew back in Cleveland dreamed of a client like her, with deep gilded pockets filled with money and empty of sense. The sun was shining and there was hay to be made. Of course, she had chosen one of the best hotels in New York City for their visit. The room around the man was steeped in finery. Delicate silver frosted the ceiling overhead. Marble imported from Siena glossed the floors, the walls, the steps of the grand staircase. Ornate balustrades stood sentinel over the guests' comings and goings. Yes, he thought, a man could prosper among such luxury, and even greener pastures than these beckoned. On the hour, he was going to meet an American king in his castle. And then, in a silken rustle, she appeared at the staircase landing. Mrs. Cassie Chadwick seemed at her ease among the butterscotch marble and the glimmering silver. As she descended the steps, he surveyed her, her black hair piled atop her head, the mysterious smile tugging at her thin lips, her big brown eyes. Fine wrinkles collected over 42 years etched her round face. Could the rumors be true, he wondered for perhaps the 100th time? How precisely was the woman connected to her benefactor? He would have to see for himself. Perhaps the resemblance between them would be evident. A carriage was called, and they waited together for a time. As usual, he noted the marks of wealth about her, many and unmistakable. Fur, lace, plush velvet, sparkling diamonds. Women were sieves as far as money was concerned. At least this particular sieve was sifting into his hands. An astute man could always turn a dollar from a rich, foolish woman. Finally, the carriage arrived. Mrs. Chadwick gave the address, 2 East 91st Street and 5th Avenue. As the wheels rolled on, the attorney tried to recall the wording of the agreement he had drawn up for his client. Essentially, it was a gift. $7 million was to be gifted to her by a second party. And that second party? None other than Andrew Carnegie. The attorney, as usual, was satisfied with his work. But questions burned in his mind. How did Mrs. Chadwick know the richest man in the world? And why was the Steel King gifting her $7 million? The attorney had come to no conclusions by the time the carriage pulled up at 2 East 91st Street. Carnegie's mansion loomed ahead, 3.5 stories of trim red brick and neat white stone arranged in near-perfect symmetry. The attorney found his eyes snatching in every direction, greedy to take it in. They caught on a magnificent copper and glass canopy hanging over the front doors. Its crystalline panes snared sunlight in glittering winks as the carriage rolled to a stop. The attorney started to stand, his pulse quickening. This was an opportunity, and one that he did not intend to squander. Thus far, he had built up a fine career. All Cleveland esteemed him as an accomplished lawyer. But transacting business with Andrew Carnegie could open doors he'd never dreamed of before. The man could just see. A staying hand from Mrs. Chadwick gave him pause. It might be better, she suggested with that lisp of hers, if she were to go in alone. After all, the matter was a personal one. Such delicate business might be better done in private. Yes, the more she thought of it, the surer she was. Besides, the specifics of the contract had already been ironed out. All that was needed was Andrew Carnegie's signature, and she could certainly get that on her own. Reluctantly, the attorney sank back into his seat. Mrs. Chadwick appeared sure. In the end, she was his client, not Carnegie. She was the one paying his exorbitant fees, the one who had bankrolled their stay at one of the nicest hotels in New York City. With a heavy sigh, he watched the woman's silken skirts swish as she strolled up the walk and knocked on the immense front door of the Carnegie mansion. Seconds later, she was admitted. 20 minutes ticked by. The man in the carriage felt rather like a child sent out of the room so the grown-ups could talk business. He stared at the windows trimmed in stone, trying to glimpse the spoils of the steel trade. The newspaper said that Carnegie had installed an elevator inside. To think, an elevator in one's own house. Straining his ears, the man could almost hear its mechanical hum. A personal matter, Mrs. Chadwick had said. Delicate. Just how delicate, though? How personal? The rumors simply couldn't be true. Still, it was curious. Mrs. Chadwick returned with sunshine stretching from ear to ear, her brown eyes positively dazzled as she climbed into the carriage. It was done, she pronounced with a wide, triumphant smile. Andrew Carnegie had signed the contract. The already boundlessly wealthy woman was now $7 million richer. The carriage rolled on, back toward the gilded trappings of the Holland House. All the way, the attorney studied the beaming woman and wondered. Whispers around Cleveland had already hinted at Mrs. Chadwick's true identity. And now, after watching her come and go from Carnegie's home as she pleased, the attorney could believe the rumors. The more he considered it, the more it made sense. Yes, it all added up. Suddenly, the man couldn't wait to get back to Cleveland. Within days of returning, he would spread the story throughout his circle. Before long, the city would know what he did, that Mrs. Cassie Chadwick was the bastard daughter of Andrew Carnegie. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, I can answer them. Probably.
So what was your hook about her story that made you want to write a book? Because that's a commitment.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Also, I learned about her in a podcast, and at the time, this was like 6 years ago, I wanted to read a book about her because I love crime and I love con artists and swindlers, and at the time I had just been living in Cleveland and I'd never heard of her, so I was so excited to read about her. But there was just one book out at that time, and it was really outdated. It had been written in 1975, and it was kind of half fictionalized. So I started researching and was like, oh, there's a lot of information here, so I can write a book. But yeah, it was that the swindler and the Cleveland history was really interesting to me. Yes, hi.
What part of yourself do you see in her?
I don't know if I should say. I mentioned at the end of my talk living vicariously through her because I would love to be a little more confident, right? Like these con artists have this confidence to walk into a room and just lie to people and just think that people will believe them. And I don't know, I've always wished that I had more of that kind of confidence and attitude. I think what I share with Cassie is imagination. I mean, I think that she spent a lot of time, one of the things that I go over in the first chapter, when she's a child, she'll just sit there and kind of stare off into the distance for hours at a time and kind of seem almost in a trance. And I mean, I didn't do that when I was a kid, but I feel like she probably had a very big active imagination, especially with the way she's constantly building these worlds for herself that are different from reality. And I've always had very active imagination, so yeah. Yes.
Do you think her imagination made her believe that some of this reality she was creating was actually true?
I've thought about that, and back then, I mean, if you read about swindlers, especially female swindlers at the time, a lot of them would be diagnosed with this monomania, which is kind of, I mean, in Gilded Age terms, you know, obsession and delusion with some, like, one idea. So with Cassie, it would have been that she was an heiress or something. I think, though, realistically, that she was doing way too much work to actually be believing this stuff. I mean, she was forging all these documents that were super complex and that were fooling lawyers and stuff. Because I didn't think about that. Like, was she believing this stuff? I think she wanted to. From a young age, she really wanted to be an heiress. But it's hard to say with all of the complicated lies and all of the written forgeries that she actually was believing things. But I don't know. Who's to say? Yes.
As I was reading, I was impressed with how you were able to take the story and marry it to a style that it almost begged for. I mean, it's not like you really had a choice about how to write the story. But was that a difficult thing for you to do? Should it be narrative? Should it be dry as dust history? How did you pick the style, or did you just say, I'm going to let this thing write itself?
It was kind of something that I'd written the prologue and was talking to my editor when we first started working on this book, and she suggested leaning into the narrative format. Because my first idea was like a biography. That was most of what I had read at that time. And it really did just work out very organically, that once I started writing it like that, it was just fun and really natural fit. So it was my editor's idea to lean into it, but it just made it so much more fun.
But it is fun to read. You made it fun to read.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah.
What was your favorite part of researching? Yeah.
I had a couple of really cool research things. I went to the Cleveland, the Historical Society archives, and I got to actually hold letters that she had written and see her signature and her little embossed stationery, and that was amazing.
That's awesome.
Yes. And then I think the smuggling stuff was really fun for me because I got to read this memoir of the customs agent who had tried to get her in trouble, and he was just years later very upset that she did not get in trouble for smuggling. It was so much fun to read how he remembered her as just this larger than life figure who just got away and everyone was corrupt, and he was just very, very mad still. And it was fun to read that. Yeah.
I'm curious, as you were researching, if there was some little nugget that you learned about her that either really endeared you to her, because she sounds like she's pretty crooked.
Yeah.
But if there was something that endeared her to you, or something that just really surprised you.
She was extremely generous with people once she got a lot of money, and that was cool to read. And sometimes in bizarre ways, like she would pick up a child from the street and take them to a store and buy them flowers or a nice pocket watch. It's like, well, maybe not what this child needs the most in the world.
Yeah.
But it was sweet, and she paid her staff really well, and she would give her coat gut a sealskin coat. And one of the girls who waited on her at the department store when she got married, Cassie furnished her entire apartment for her. So there were a lot of things like that. There was a lot of her buying expensive things for people in society, kind of trying to buy her way in. But there was also a lot of her buying stuff for people who weren't going to help her strategically. She just liked, kind of throwing her money around on people who didn't have as much. So that was really cool. Yeah. Yes.
What was your process for researching and writing this?
It was a lot of going back and going back. I would write out a chapter in a kind of bare bones way. And it was a lot of going to different, like Google Books has a bunch of really old books or some of the online archives and trying to fill in the setting. So like, she's in a room, can I find a description of this hotel and what the rooms were like and what the lobby was like? So I'd write out the chapter and then like go back and insert the details as I could find them. And I have this massive outline that was like 200 and some pages. So it was a lot of like trying to dig up all the, like bring all the parts together. It just was very painstaking at times, but that was my process.
So how long did it take you to write the book? If you did all that digging?
I'd written a very rough version of the book a long time ago, like maybe 4 years ago or 5 years ago. But when I went back and I got my book contract and I was going to do it in a narrative way, that was about 6 months, a little bit over that. But I already had this structure that I could just go in and bulldoze it, but I still had a structure. So it took a lot less time. Yes, in the back.
Do you have any personal critiques of how you could like improve the book, like the character development, or the story, or just like the themes you use?
I'm always reading my book and finding sections that I was like, I could have written that better. And yeah, just didn't want to read it at all for a while after I was done with it because I kept finding these sections that were a little bit more rough around the edges. I wish I had more details about certain things as well. Things like her son Emil, I never found out who his father was. I could not find out what happened to Emil after the story. I just couldn't find anything. So there were so many people that I wanted to like tie up their stories or find out more about their characters and who they were as people, but just didn't have the information. But yeah, I wish I would have had more letters of hers. The letters that I had were really cool, but they were also very business related. So it would have been cool to have more actual letters, but yeah.
You do have a couple of people from OFPL Zoomers saying hello, and your childhood friend in Seattle. So you have a lot of people watching online as
Hi.
well.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.
All right. So we will have Annie up here at the front signing. Good news and bad news. We have sold out of the book. So we can take orders. Annie will come back and we'll personalize copies. So if you want to have those for pickup or for mail out, we can do that at the desk. But congratulations, you sold out another.